Welcome back to Vivid Noise, and the game we're looking at today is Mega Man X5, and more specifically, I want to talk about the place that this franchise was in relative to what was going on in, the world of video games as a whole. Kind of similar to my Ridge Racer 5 video, which I'm sure quite a few of you have seen. But first, let's just talk about the game itself and the X franchise as a whole, or just Mega Man as a whole. I haven't really talked about Mega Man too much on this channel. I think I brought him up once in my Sonic Adventure DX video, which is like super long, so you haven't seen that part of the video most likely. But I talked about how Mega Man 9 I feel was partially responsible for Sonic Mania, and how Mega Man 11 was the Sonic Superstars before Sonic Superstars. If you actually want to hear that, just look the video up and then skip to Red Mountain. That's when I talk about Mega Man. Before I jump into the historical context this game was released in and why it feels like old, but also it's held up better than a lot of games that didn't feel old at the time. It's the tale as old as time. The classic, the simpler game holds up better than the more complicated game. I'll talk about that later. But first I want to talk about sort of my relationship with the Mega Man games as a whole, specifically Classic and X. I'm not really interested in the Zero games or the Battle Network, Star Force. No, we're just sticking to Classic Mega Man and Mega Man X here. And what's kind of strange about these games is their structure. You see, I'm sure you're familiar with this, but the classic Mega Man games and Mega Man X as well are non-linear, kind of. Like, you have to complete all of the stages, but you can do it in any order. Now, the games do typically have a very strongly suggested order via the weaknesses, as in there's always one obvious guy you gotta take out first, because he's super easy to do with just the Mega Buster, and then you can use his weakness to take everyone else out. This is especially prevalent in the games where the bosses have reset patterns, like patterns that reset once you hit them with the weakness. So like Mega Man 7, 8, X4, X5, X6, I think X7 and X8 as well, to a certain extent with some of the bosses. In this playthrough, well, it's not really a playthrough, I'm just going to do 4 stages. But for these levels, I'm only going to be using the Buster because, well, to be honest, I don't actually want to do it in like a proper weakness order, because I really don't feel like doing Squid Antler or, what do you call them, a Duff McWhalen stage. And yes, I'm using the Guns N' Roses names because those are the best ones, damn it. But no, I'm just going to do this level, Matrex, I think Izzy Glow, and what was it? The Skyver as well. Those are generally my favorite stages in the game. The non-linearity of the Mega Man games have this almost, I want to call it the Doom shareware effect, if you know what I'm talking about. So basically, the reason why Doom 2 was a commercial release with no shareware version was because, according to John Carmack, a lot of people consider themselves to have finished Doom after just beating the shareware episode. That's kind of how I am with Mega Man, as in I always consider myself done with a Mega Man game when I'm done with all of the Robot Masters / Mavericks. That's not how these games end. They never end that way. There's always the post-Maverick, post-Robot Master stages. You got Wily, you got Sigma, whoever it might be, whoever fake out villain, then you actually get the real villain, who is usually, Sigma or Wily. And that's how the games are supposed to play out. I don't know, I'm always either burnt out or just sort of bored at the end. That's not really the game's fault. These levels aren't that long. It's more of a me problem, but I just can't help but feel that, like, when I've got everything available to me in this way from the start, it feels more like a buffet of a game rather than one proper linear experience, even though you can totally play it linearly if you want. In fact, a lot of the games strongly suggest it. I mean, you really think that they made Blockman for Mega Man 11 without him being the first guy in mind? Like, no, they clearly designed him to be the easy first boss, although on a harder difficulty he's not that easy. But still, generally it's like there's always the one obvious first Maverick, first Robot Master you gotta take out, Cutman, or be it well, no, weirdly enough, in Mega Man 2, it's Metal Man, who you really wouldn't think to take on first, but he's pretty easy and you get like the best weapon, so yeah, you're gonna do him first. I guess I sort of treat the Mega Man games like the variety packs of video games in a way, which it really is a me problem, and I should try and give them the proper time when they deserve it, that is. I don't think I'm not sure if Mega Man X6 does, although honestly, I don't really hate Mega Man X6 quite as much, mainly because I've never had the misfortune of actually having to play it without the use of save states, or I guess Rookie Hunter mode with the Legacy Collection. And come on, it gave us like the best Let's Play in Let's Play history in the Clement Mega Man X6 playthrough. Come on, that's amazing. But anyway, as far as my history with the X games in particular goes, it's a very common story. So I watched SGB play Mega Man X1, and I heard John sing its praises, and obviously he more recently, well, not more recently, a couple years ago now, he did a video talking about just play this game, and I agree, yeah, it's great. Anyway, so I obviously played Mega Man X1, and yeah, I really enjoyed it, never completed it. In fact, come to think of it, I think I've gotten to the final boss, but never actually beaten the final boss. I would just sort of end it right there. I mean, I've got save states, so it could eventually happen. It's going to happen when you have save states, but I just can't be bothered. Honestly, I've seen everything the game has to offer. Don't really care at that point, but it's a great game. Go and play it. In fact, play it over X5. I'll explain why I'm doing X5 later. Eventually, I played X2 and X3 and X4, and then this, obviously, and X6, and X7, and I've played all of them. Yeah, I've played every single Mega Man X game, except for Command Mission. Don't really care for whatever kind of game that's supposed to be. I think it's like an RPG, sort of. Yeah, don't want to play that, but I've played the rest of them, and hot take, guys, X7 ain't that good. No, it wasn't like the worst game I've ever played, but it helps that I had a rapid fire macro. I think the game actually does have a built-in rapid fire. This game has a built-in rapid fire, but I'm using a macro, as you can tell. I don't have the world's fastest, pinky finger in this case. I've configured it to the shift key to have like a macro for the square button on the PS1, and that's how I can just skip through shit really quickly and fire really fast, because the game does have a built-in rapid fire feature. It prevents you from being able to charge as well. It also has an auto charge, but then it gets kind of awkward with switching weapons and whatever. I just prefer to play it this way. If I had to recommend any of the PS1 era X games to anyone, it would be X4. X4 is a textbook example of just taking what works, making it prettier, adding some more quality of life stuff, just generally polishing it, making a really, really solid game. And it is great, really. It's simple, it's not crazy ambitious, and that is actually why I really like this game in particular. Not even that it's ambitious from a gameplay standpoint. Really, this game doesn't do much in the way of the actual gameplay that is super different. I just love the presentation and kind of how ugly the game is. Like, this game is fucking ugly at times with its combination of 2D sprites and pre-rendered assets, but it's like an endearing kind of ugly that I sort of find appealing. Like, X4 is gorgeous, jaw-droppingly gorgeous. X6 looks like a better looking version of this game as far as the colors and assets go, no doubt thanks to the higher quality renders because it was 2001 rather than, this game I imagine was mostly developed in 99 and released in 2000. Another aspect I feel that X6 kind of gets a little too much hype and overshadows X5 in would be the soundtrack. Yes, X6's soundtrack is fire. Absolute fucking blaze heatniks, you know what I mean? It's insane. X4's soundtrack is really good too, not super memorable, but all of the levels fit very well. But I think X5's soundtrack is slept on. Like, I can't think of a single Gen Z kind of slang term that can accurately describe how underrated the soundtrack for X5 is. And no, it's not just because it gave us the hidden block theme, like when you beat the level. I might edit that. No, I'm not going to edit that in. That would be kind of funny, but it wouldn't really make sense. Anyway, it's not just that. The level themes are all fantastic. They strike a perfect balance between being thematically appropriate while also having an extremely strong understanding of melody and really interesting chord progressions. This level, for example, just has this, I love how it starts on a dissonant scale degree. And it's going to sound like this pentatonic thing. It's a really well-written guitar part. And the chord progression for the second half is really cool how it changes. This is Izzy Glow. Dark Dizzy, holy shit, Dark Dizzy is it's a masterpiece of songwriting. That bass part is thick and chunky, and the lead part is just, it's perfectly written. Seriously, it's really strange. Again, really unusual note choices. but it works so well for creating the sort of vibe that you want to create for the stage. And those weird major 7 chords shifting up and down constantly in the pads. Incredible production, seriously. Grizzly Slash you heard earlier, that's such an anthemic sort of theme, right? When the key changes and everything. Matrex you're gonna hear a little later. Matrex is fucking amazing as well. It's such a rocking track, but it's not cheesy rock, right? It's very tastefully played. Yeah, there it is, right, with that squealing guitar at the start. Fantastic. Just super well written. And the next one that you're gonna hear is Skyver. That one has like a Sonic Heroes kind of vibe to it, with the guitars mixed with the synths. I've always felt like the guitar work in the Mega Man X games on PS1 specifically always had this very synthy kind of sound. I think they're mostly real guitars, but there's something applied to them that makes them almost sound like synths, right? And there's tons of synth work mixed in as well, but it took me a lot of listening to really realize that yes, this is a real guitar, but it sounds so unreal, right? Aside from my preference for this game overall, why did I pick it? Well, here's why. It's because this game was released in late 2000 for the PS1. Now keep in mind, the PS2 was already out. And so what's interesting is that unlike X6, which existed only to just get a little bit more money out of the series and I guess also the sales of the PS1, although, you know, backwards compatibility kind of made it a PS2 game in of itself, because, you know, the PS2 could play PS1 games anyway, so they could have bought it for that. But this was supposed to be like the big final sort of chapter, and then X6 wasn't. But that's sort of irrelevant. Yes, I really do appreciate the game just for that alone, but it's also the context in which it was released. This was released during a time when every genre was making that big shift. Platformers, well, racing games had already been 3D for quite a while, and so were shooters. Strategy games, I guess, were making that shift to 3D as opposed to 2D sprites. Just so many things were changing in it. This game feels firmly in the early 90s, and it's not a bad thing whatsoever. I mean, there's a lot of things that, you know, are done in this game that they couldn't have done back then, like the level of sprite work, the music, the save system as well. Although that also makes the game ridiculously easy, because much like, you know, Mega Man X4 and Mega Man 8, and I think X6 as well, the way the game, it basically gives you all of your health back. I think it also gives you all your weapon energy back. I mean, I wouldn't know right now because I'm not using my weapons, but it's very forgiving with how the loading screen sort of distribution and health system works, that relationship between the two. And also when you die, like, the checkpoints are really, really generous. That's not to say that there's nothing distinctly 2000 about this game, you know, or X6 as well. They both have, especially when it comes to the presentation, right? There's a much heavier emphasis on that anime sort of look, which was becoming extremely popular around that time. Not like the earlier games didn't have it, they just weren't able to display it quite as much because they didn't have discs to store actual JPEGs and PNGs on them, right? Whereas on PS1 you could do a lot more. And the music, you know, stylistically, while for the actual in-game soundtrack is its own thing and sounds totally timeless. Like, really, this music will never age. But if you're talking about the Japanese releases of this game in particular, oh my god, the intro and I think the outro music as well, well, no, specifically the intro music for both this and X6 are just, they're like Japanese new metal, and it's kind of bad, but it's also really good in a weird way. Like, it's actually really catchy to listen to. It just has a lot of those strange sort of chordal cliches and guitar work that you'd hear around that time that sounds kind of dated, but it's pretty cool. I mean, it's not heavy, but that really doesn't matter. You don't need the song to be heavy to be a memorable, fun song, right? It was that fun kind of new metal, right? And the outro music was fantastic. There's this really, really great pop song in Mega Man X6, like for the outro, it's the ending credits. That's a fantastic pop song. Seriously, I think it was called Idea, but it's like IDEA, right? Like, it's spelled out that way. It's not just the word idea. Whatever, that's how they named their titles. And that's a great pop song, right? And I don't know how timeless that's going to be, but it's definitely going to hold up a lot better than the intro and outro music. But, you know, I'm always going to have a soft spot for that sort of chunky drop B sort of shit, or C sharp. It's like, hey, Linkin Park, right? No, we have Linkin Park at home. Anyway, getting back on track, another thing that I feel makes this game Well, it's helped this game, while at the same time, I can imagine that when it was released, it might have felt, I guess, kind of antiquated, was the fact that, well, Mega Man Legends existed at around this time. In fact, Mega Man Legends came out several years before this game did, and that was a pretty big game. It took Mega Man into a completely different direction in 3D, and actually did it pretty well, if I remember correctly. I haven't played much of the game myself. I'm just not super interested in that kind of game, but from what I can tell, it is, it's the more polished kind of 3D adventure game from that time, and the presentation in that game is fantastic. The choice to make the character design so simple and sort of angular so that they looked good on PS1, and to make their faces 2D sprites, means that unlike 90% of 3D rendered PS1 games, they look good. They look expressive. They look alive. Like, you see them and you think like, oh my god, these are actual characters. They're not a blob of pixels with like 2 facial expressions or something. They're characters. They're real and they look amazing. That is how you transition your cartoony characters into the third dimension before you can actually animate their faces properly, that is. Not to say the PS1 didn't have well-animated, real 3D rendered faces. I mean, Crash Bandicoot had that, and so did Spyro. But if you're gonna do it any other way, you're gonna do it the Mega Man Legends way. I'm surprised more games didn't try that approach, right? It just looked fantastic. Although at the same time, I think the fact that the X series didn't make that transition to 3D until X7, which was X7, I think it speaks for the, I guess, integrity of the creators. Not to say that, they're faultless because X6 happened, but the fact that they stuck with 2D even after Legends, even after everyone else was doing 3D, it tells me that they, at least at that time, they still knew that this is how these games are made and this is how they are fun. And it's because of that that X6, even though it's really badly designed and makes a bunch of stupid decisions, it's at its core, very deep down, still a fun game because it has this game and also X4's great controls. They haven't changed that. The controls are still fast, tight, snappy, responsive, just fucking perfect. Perfect 2D play controls for this kind of game. So X6 just naturally sort of has that advantage. Now that I'm thinking about it a little more, I feel like the X games were a tragic story in a way, because let's say they stuck with 2D. Let's say X6 was a lot better and X7 never happened. They just went straight to X8, which would have been X7, as in they just stuck with 2D. And yes, I know X8 had a bunch of gimmicky stages, but I mean, that's gonna happen, right? But that's excusable, I feel, just to add some more variety. But the game was still fundamentally a 2D platformer. The 6th generation was it was a difficult time for 2D platformers because just so many of them were not 2D, because it just felt like it was almost a waste because technology was improving so quickly and 3D games were becoming more and more feasible, and there were so many great new titles coming out which took advantage of that it almost felt like this kind of game would have been a completely archaic choice. Now we know better, especially, indie games and everything, and with just the fact that 2D games are still very much popular. But at that time, it was very different. This game, I think, still reviewed relatively well, although I'm not sure how much we should really trust the reviews. I mean, IGN gave X6 like an 8, I think. Like, come on. I know they're fucking stupid, right? But I thought they were only stupid when it came to, like, Sonic. No, apparently they're stupid when it came to Mega Man as well, at least back then. If they gave, like 9, 10, and 11 good reviews, well, good, because they're really good games, especially 9 and Mega Man 11 as well. That's not to say that the current outlook for Mega Man X is completely bleak. I mean, the X Legacy collections did fairly well, and there's also the Mega Man Zero collections. Clearly, Capcom knows there's an audience for this, but the chances of getting a new one, I don't know. I feel like we might see a Mega Man 12 much sooner than an X9. I kind of hope I'm wrong, but really, what else would you even do with Mega Man X from this point on, other than just making a new one that takes, obviously takes inspiration from the first one because it kind of was the best, but I feel like the first one would still be the best. after a theoretical X9 comes out, or like a reboot or something, but I don't know. I don't want to call this a legacy franchise. It really would hurt me to say that, but I just can't imagine anything else being done here. From a gameplay standpoint, from a story standpoint, and there's always more things you can come up when it comes to the story. But what would he do? Maybe make an X8 successor that takes out some of the gimmicks and improves the visuals. Duh. Maybe makes the game more lighthearted. Not to say that it was super dark. I think X5 was actually the darkest it got. But it's a really complicated situation. I don't really know if there's any exit point here. I don't mean to make this seem too bleak. I mean, we're still getting really good fan projects and indie projects as well that take inspiration from classic Mega Man and Mega Man X. So I don't think we're ever going to see a complete drought of these sort of games. But that's not to say that we necessarily need to see more of them from the official studios, really. I mean, there's nothing stopping you from just playing the really well-made Mega Man X fan games that are out there, not to mention the non-fan games that still clearly take inspiration from X and Mega Man Classic, and you can always just mod them back. If they're on PC, you can mod all that stuff back in, I'm sure. This one took a bit of a turn, but still, I hope you enjoyed this episode of Vivid Noise. Next one's either going to be a classic rally game or a bit of an unconventional kart racer sort of game. I'll see you guys then.